Anastasia, that's right. For people, any regime is a constant choice between two evils. Rigden, quite right. So, let us return to the word politics. The word polis is derived from the Italian polizza, which means a receipt, contract. The archons are very fond of launching their projects under words that have a double meaning. Considering themselves to be intermediaries between gods and people, the archons projected the priestly model of governance onto society, or rather, onto that part of society which for one reason or another was not subordinated to their religious power. For instance, it would include people who lived in other countries, believed only in their local gods, had a different culture, and so on. The word politics was formed by them out of two Greek words, from poly standing for many and theos meaning God, and meant nothing more than the rule of many gods over society. It is from there that tin gods came about, politicians, who are subordinated to the system of the archons' rule. It is not surprising that today many countries live with the Anglo-Saxon law as well as continental law, some of the most common among the world's legal systems. But back in the day, the basis for their creation was the Roman law, which was developed by the priesthood in ancient Rome, the law of the 12 tables and other priestly documents for governing people, written in the best traditions of the animal nature. Anastasia, well, yes, and that is why, as people say, the political law, just like the religious one, is always punitive. And in general, it is sad, of course, that the world community lives according to the rules made by the archons, under their aggressive signs. Rigden, it lives so because people actually do not know who governs them and how, and they do not know because they do not delve deeply into these matters. If people show more interest in world's history or at least heraldry, in medieval Latin heraldus meaning a herald, the study of coats of arms, it will open their eyes to rather interesting facts, to which they simply did not pay any attention previously. In particular, if we have a look at the standards, flags, emblems of princedoms, cities, and coats of arms of states which, as a rule, were designed by the wards of archons and palmed off onto ignorant rulers, then we can see the signs and symbols in them that influence the subconscious and activate the animal nature in people. All this exists today as well, and, just like before, it is intended to secretly influence people's consciousness. It is enough to have a look at the official symbols of the modern countries of the world, their central and local government bodies, ministries, departments, and services, as well as at the symbols printed on the banknotes of various currencies of the world. These are mainly crosses, a mark to block the front essence, with a sign or a symbol, more often with the royal attributes of earthly power in form of a crown, an emphasis on the animal nature, I mean lateral essences of a person, which are mostly depicted in the form of one or another aggressive animal on each side of the central symbol. It is enough to look at the number of coats of arms and emblems marked with Freemason signs or symbols, starting with cities and countries and ending with international organizations and corporations, bow and arrows, together and separately, axe, sickle, hammer, sword, rapiers, firearms, compass, lion, leopard, dragon, eagle, Phrygian cap, an olive branch, Jewish priesthood. Not to mention the presence, in many cases, of certain numerical symbols in the form of stars, 6, 13, and so on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Figure 108. Coats of arms of various countries. 1. Gambia. 2. Bhutan. 3. Guyana. 4. The Federal Republic of Germany. 5. The German Democratic Republic, 1949 to 1990. France. 7. USA. 8. Netherlands. 9. French Empire, 1804-1815. 10. Norway. 11. Georgia, 1991 to 2004. The sevenfold structure of the coat of arms, 7 rays and 7 stars, is given for comparison to the coat of arms. 12. Georgia, since 2004. 13. Belgium, 14. Vatican. These aggressive signs are used in public attributes intended for mass production, that is, people often see and use them, while taking them for granted, in documents, on buildings, clothes, in mass media, and so on. Their effect on the human psyche is like a drop that wears away a stone. They subconsciously stimulate the animal nature and aggression, awakening the lower instincts. As a result, all this contributes to the growth of tension in society, like methane gas in a mine. At some point, it is enough to strike a spark, that is, to provoke aggression in a certain mass of people for an entire state to be swept up in a wave of violence and irreversible destructive consequences, or rather, predictable inevitable consequences. But this scheme of secret control of people works only as long as the majority of people do not know about it. Archons use every opportunity to place their signs and symbols on the territories under control, to put, so to say, their mold. What is more, all this is done quietly, with formal participation of peoples in such discussions. The decision, as a rule, is made by a narrow circle of officials, and yet another story is invented for the general public that precisely these symbols and signs are very significant for people living in the city or state from the point of view of history, philosophy, and culture of this area. Furthermore, sometimes these matters involve scientists, who are given the task of substantiating precisely such an opinion and no other. But what I want to say about it is this. If people themselves, regardless of someone's opinion, become interested in history of their country and their people and in symbols and signs, if they expand their horizons in these matters as well, responsibly approaching the process of cognition from the perspective of the observer of the spiritual nature, it will be more difficult to deceive them. After all, we are talking about the land where they, their children, and grandchildren are to live. In other words, when people know the truth, at the local level they will put things in order themselves. For the main power is in the majority, in society itself, and not in a bunch of priests and politicians' minions. Anastasia, so, the archons have made levers of control over the global society for themselves out of the world politics, and from states as such, they've made tools of violence over nations and the means of enrichment for themselves and a handful of puppets in power whom they control. Rigden, it is no secret that in any country of the world, the real politics is done behind the scenes, where its decisions and deals are not discussed with the voters. Anastasia, yes, and society itself secretly promotes the model, where the strong destroys the weak, starting with relationships in a small group of people, a family, firm, organization, and ending with relations between countries when strong states devour the weak ones and compete among themselves. In other words, the same laws of the animal mind. Rigden, absolutely. Evidence of such a system, which has been artificially created by people themselves and which works as a conductor of the will of the animal mind, can be seen if one knows the whole truth of what politicians have been doing. Perhaps, for a better understanding, I will give a typical example from history. Several centuries ago in medieval Europe, there were many feudal principalities governed by rulers of all kinds. Each such prince-sealing and politician had his soldiers, flags, coats of arms, retinue, and something resembling a government. His princely mercenary army was called a gang of bandits, from the Celtic band meaning a bond. So, what did they do? Princes were constantly at war among themselves and thus expanded the territory under their control, establishing taxation on the occupied lands for local merchants, craftsmen, and peasants. That is, they collected tax, payments, from them for their patronage and protection from other princes, who, in fact, were also bandits. And you had better not refuse such princes benefaction since the one who protected and threatened was the same person. But the point is that there were many such hunters for other people's belongings. For there was major competition among the princes, so to speak, to provide military, security, services to the public. Today, one princeling politician organizes bloody showdowns, and tomorrow another one. And they all long to be the defenders of the orphaned and oppressed. But in fact, it was a real robbery under the guise of protecting the population. As they say, a gang is still a gang. And today, nothing has changed in the world politics. Only now, open abuse of peoples is called peaceful taxation, but the system of extortion has remained the same. This violently peaceful, voluntary compulsory collection of money is a robbery of the population of the planet on small and large scale. It is just that today all this came to be called by more beautiful words: monopoly on legitimate abuse, monopoly on customs duties, food, information, and so on. Anastasia, that is true. In many countries, a fee is taken from people even for a simple, formal piece of paper, to process documents, confirm your own rights, and even to accept a complaint for consideration. This surely doesn't make the citizen's life any easier. Rigden, well, gangs will be gangs, they have remained as they were, only now they are robbing the population already on a different scale, using the laws written by them. Although it is all about people themselves, who are the majority, but do nothing, while the archons are a minority, but constantly acting and very aggressively. That is all the difference. It is necessary for people themselves to wake up, broaden their horizons of knowledge, actively participate in the management of the world society, combine their efforts, be friends with each other, regardless of nationality, race, and country of residence. Then mankind will eventually come to that model of a just society of which it has dreamt for so long. Archons have made sure that many people work for politics, in other words, that a significant human potential was involved. Besides, the innovative human resource is mostly in their power, because the world's science, in general, is sponsored and controlled by the organizations and funds dependent on them. Moreover, the archons initiated the creation of various sciences, which study and develop methods of controlling the masses, so that people themselves invent how to put themselves into archons' shackles. For example, let us take sociology, from the Latin word societas, which stands for society, and logos, which means the study of, the science which studies society and the laws of its development, social groups, and relationships of the personality with society. What exactly do scientists study in the context of this science, executing the program tasks of those who sponsor and shelter them? Sociology does not study the inner world of human. Those in power have assigned this task to psychology and put the heat on to direct the priorities of its development at nurturing egoists in society under any plausible pretext. And spiritual matters were completely put under control of priests, who are feeding off religions. Everything is divided and complicated in order to discourage a person from getting to the essence, what is the meaning of his life, who he really is, and what truly enormous potential he has. So, sociology studies the behavior of large masses of people as well as various interactions in small social groups. In other words, these scientists observe the behavior of the individual and the collective animal mind. But who uses the results of their research and for what purposes? Again, politicians and priests do so in order to make it easier to govern people and to push the right buttons in their consciousness, activating the animal nature. And that is not to mention political science. It is ludicrous and sad to say what objective this science has and what it studies. For example, predicting a change of ruling regimes, the outcome of the political struggle of parties, inventing and producing political images for candidates, engaging in pre-election campaigns, and thinking up the speeches, not deeds, and new promises with which to win the public sympathy for a candidate during an election campaign. But political scientists, just like sociologists, psychologists, journalists, and other participants of this political show, are people of people. A politician only pays for some people to create a myth about him for other people, so that he can get to greater power for the sake of his own interests. So it means that he is nothing on his own, without the support of people, who promote him with their own hands. Moreover, later people themselves carry out the orders of this politician and also suffer from them. In the world, the elections of politicians have long been turned into one-off mass political show under the name of people power. What is its hidden purpose? What is its influence on nations? What do masses see? Televised casting of candidates, some elements of reality show with juicy details of private lives of the main characters, their competition with each other in shocking statements, an endless stream of mutual accusations, and so on. That is, everything is done to stimulate the animal nature in people, make emotions and thoughts go round in a vicious circle so that as a result it would be easier to control this mass, regardless of who among these political puppets of those in power will win. Who today defines the vector of development of the global society? The archons do, and they manipulate the world politics as their own tool of power over nations. The archons are subordinated to the system of the animal mind, and they implement their ideas through politicians. But the majority of people do not know about these things happening behind the global scenes. They are deliberately fogged only by that theater of actions which takes place on the political scene of their country, thereby limiting the range of their cognition of more, narrowing their consciousness and, consequently, depriving them of the desire to compare and analyze the events on the scale of the world society. So people see politicians developing laws, by which the society is to live. But they do not even go into the question why these particular laws and why these particular politicians carry out these projects. Why similar things are being implemented or have already been implemented in other countries of the world, and how has it affected the life of society in reality, what dominant did it activate in it? At best they let people understand that the politicians of their country defend the positions of a particular gang, which they represent. But again, who makes all these programs a reality? Management of the current affairs of any state is carried out by the officials belonging, again, to the people. And who are politicians in any country? Politicians are people from the elite, who in their majority have mainly come into power in order to secure their business and satisfy their megalomania. Because such people who became dependent and fell under the power of the system of the animal mind are no longer satisfied with money. They already want to have something more, for example, the ability to control a large number of people and secretly enjoy these people's servility. Many of them do not even understand that they are only conductors of the will of the animal mind. Whether a person realizes this or not, his soul definitely suffers from this choice of the personality and an unwise waste of life forces, which separates it from the spiritual world evermore. After all, life passes very quickly, and power is given for a short time, but the price for it is disproportionately high. A life's moment of human weakness turns into a long agony of a subpersonality and prolongation of the soul's ordeals in the captivity of matter. Too high a price will have to be paid for choosing those illusions which, like vapor, appear for a short time and then disappear in the darkness of existence. Those clever politicians who manage to see this global bluff and understand the current destructive direction of movement of the world society along the path of reverse swastika and realize where from the root of all the evil of formation of negative world events grows, in their turn, also do not know what is to be done. They are looking for an answer to the question how to actually get rid of this old, sick tree of the system of power of the world priests, whose infected roots have entwined the whole world like an octopus. Actually, there is nothing difficult here if you understand the tools used by the archons, in whose hands most of the earth's capital is concentrated. The task of the archons is to impose another illusion, an ideology of the animal mind to as many people as possible so that the masses believe in it. For example, to convince the public of the advantages of the material way of thinking and the consumer format of public relations, to frighten people with another world crisis, to convince of the necessity of starting a war or an ethnic strife, to set the followers of different religions at loggerheads, to arrange bloody strife, conflicts, color revolutions, and so on. And then, when masses of people are infected with these ideas, people themselves materialize them, starting to perpetrate all this disgrace with their own hands. The main thing for the archons is to activate the animal nature in people, or rather, their collective animal mind. After all, they only write scenarios and sponsor their politicians. And it is their overall world political web that is the active tool to influence the masses. After all, who is a politician? An actor, one who plays the role written for him. His task is to make frequent appearances on the television screens of his country as well as in the press, speak beautifully, and inform people about certain ideas. Politics is the art of lying from Ahriman. It was initially formed this way by the archons and still continues to exist in this form in the global society. So, a politician is, in fact, an actor. On the public stages of their countries, the politicians who work for the archons convey the ideas of their priests, script writers and producers, sponsors, whose existence people do not even suspect. The public, while listening to the performances of such actors, thinks that everything said is a great idea of these politicians, which so convincingly calls for war or ethnic strife, supposedly in the name of a happy future of this nation. But none of them mentions that war brings death, and any strife brings instability and economic recession in society. The crowd listens and hears the illusions, catching the ideas, which activate the animal nature and which by and large come from the programs and purposes of the will of the animal mind. Imagine the archons proposing to each sensible person on the planet individually an idea that he should go to war with his brothers so that archons could live well. Where would everybody tell them to go? That's right, to a certain well-known address. What intelligent person would want to destroy the peace and quiet of his family, relatives, and friends? What is war for most people? It is death, destruction, and grief. And what is a provoked war among nations for the archons? It is not so much a method of quick enrichment as a political game and the creation of conditions for greater control, expansion, and assertion of their power over the population of the countries at war. After all, during a war, the warring states not only deplete their resources. After it is over, the survivors still live in fear, and the countries are politically and economically dependent on the mighty of this world. The people on both sides continue to be afraid of each other and feel hatred even towards new generations born after the war. In other words, the masses live in constant fear of a threat of a new war. In other words, any war is a way of division, fragmentation of society, a method of intimidation of the people. It is not people who want war but politicians and priests. It is not one country that attacks another, but a bunch of politicians and priests are playing their game at the expense of the lives of millions of ordinary people. But if friendship flourishes among nations and people themselves actively contribute to it, the process of unification of the entire world community will begin. Together, people will be able to prevent any war, for all the conflicts in the modern world occur at the level of information to start with, that is, firstly in people's heads, the world community, and only then are developed and implemented with their hands. For first comes information, choice, a change of consciousness, and only then, the consequence of all this is action. People must not only understand this but also, to the best of their ability, they must actively oppose triggering of any war, especially at a stage of preparation of public opinion in the internet and the media. Otherwise, the archons will continue to use the effect of infecting the crowd through the army of their politicians and priests, by playing out public performances, bullying billions of television viewers and enslaving their minds in fear and obedience to the material system. If activism of the world society is awakened in the matters of self-government, and the very process of governance and all of its information is made transparent, and also this tool of archons is eliminated, politics and priesthood as world systems, through which they influence the masses, then much in the life of society can qualitatively change. The archons are just a small pitiful bunch compared to the entire mankind, and they live by deception alone that cannot last forever, like everything dead. For the one who has once betrayed himself and his spiritual nature, the truth seems stinky. He lives by deceiving others but, in fact, deceiving himself. The reason for the lie is not in a word but in the desire to deceive one's nature. Anastasia, so, the same situation exists in politics as with the spiritual aspect of society's life. If such a tool of influence over masses as politics is abolished in the world society, then, in fact, such phenomena as power will disappear from it, as well as jobs of freeloaders, that is, those who profit from public property. And clever, honest people, who truly care about the life and destinies of nations not in words but in deeds, who, unfortunately, are not that many in the political system, will continue to help the society just as conscientiously and unselfishly once the institution of the political power is abolished. For example, they will teach people the basics of public self-government and control, will apply their expertise in the good deeds of society, and so on. Although such people in politics, just like people of God in religion, are few, still they exist. For them, honor, conscience, a sincere service to society, devotion, and commitment to what they are doing are not just words but a way of being, where their life is placed on the altar of service to mankind. Rigdon, yes, this is a real feat, to be in the system and still remain a human being. And the help of these honest and clever people will be significant for society. It is necessary that the changes take place not in a particular country but everywhere among nations of the entire world. Then this process will be difficult to stop. Certainly, it is necessary that the majority of the people in the world get inspired with this idea, that people become more mature in knowledge and participate more actively in the positive transformation of all the spheres of society, starting with their country and ending with the world community. Mankind must unite. Only by joining forces can people build an entirely new world society, where the truth will reign and where there will be no place for any regime as a means of violence over people. Then in this united world community, there will be neither priests, nor politicians, nor presidents, that is, those people who rule over nations. Incidentally, the word president also had appeared in society at the suggestion of the archons, who are fans of double meanings. They did not name this position of the leader of a group, for example, preamble, from the Latin word preambulus meaning the one who goes in front. They reserved this word for the advancement of their affairs and use it to denote the introduction of legislative acts, declarations, or international documents controlled by Freemasons. While the position of the head of executive power, who governs the people, was called the president, which, when translated from the Latin precedens literally means the one who sits in front, in essence, blocking the movement of people. Suffice it to look at how many presidents of various corporations, companies, and academies of sciences we have in the world today. I am not even talking about politics. But the essence is the same. As priests implement their power in the name of God, so do politicians, while in the presidential chairs of their countries, exercise their power in the name of the people. For the first time, the archons tested the word president on the consciousness of the masses by way of the title of head of nation during the War for Independence of the American colonies. Remember, I told you about it? Anastasia, is this when the archons directed and sponsored their project to create the most free and democratic country in the world? Yes, of course, I wrote this information down in the book Sensei 4. They devised their operations carefully, planned for many years ahead and skillfully used those same signs and symbols, and even names, which influence the masses at the subconscious level. Rigdon, when the majority of people show competence in these questions as well, these problems will disappear as such. People themselves should exclude, in all spheres of their life, any possibility of manifestation of the animal nature in a person, shielding themselves and society this way from submission to the will of the animal mind. It is necessary to set the spiritual vector of development for mankind thanks to participation and efforts of each person. That is, to create a healthy environment for the regeneration of the spiritual nature in a person and its blossoming as well as for the popularization of cultural and moral values in the entire global community. When people themselves and the world community abolish the kind of institutions that imply the very notion of power, then many artificially created problems will disappear. The management of society should belong to society itself and not to the archons and their representatives. In the united society, there should be no borders at all. All people in the world should live in space in which moving about is absolutely unrestricted, that is, to have every opportunity to move absolutely freely on the planet, without limitations. There should be no conditions for the emergence of strife among people, including ethnic conflicts. There are national cultures of the peoples of the world, which contain various traditions and knowledge of humanity. But there is also the supreme concept, the spiritual, which unites people of all nationalities and which, for example, in the Russian language is known by the word "kilovek," meaning man/person/human, translator's note. By the way, the word kilovek itself is anything but simple. Cello originally meant supreme, and that is why in the old days the word indicated a forehead. And the word vek stands for power, and it originally meant filled with power, eternal. Kilovek, man or person, stands for the one who is filled with, full of, the supreme, spiritual, power. And the real man, Kilovek, or the primordial man/person is the filled one in whom the supreme, eternal power, the spiritual nature, dominates. So, all the questions should be decided together by people themselves, starting with local village councils and ending at the world level. And this process should be absolutely open to all the participants of society. Modern technologies allow this stipulation to be implemented in practice. Moreover, all these questions of the society life should be discussed and decided in their spare time off work. Such a system of a self-governing society will work only when people themselves take on the responsibility for improvement of life of the whole society and express their readiness to spend their personal time to participate in any way they can in the matters of society, including collaborative creation, on a regular basis. This is equivalent to when a person controls his thoughts and desires from the animal nature and when he assumes responsibility not just for controlling himself in these matters but also in working on creation of kind thoughts, actions, and deeds from the spiritual nature. Also in society, there should not even exist such a notion as regime of secrecy in the matters of self-government of society. First of all, this concerns funding, that is, distribution and order of using resources. Now in the world, most of the information about the flow of funds is inaccessible to the public. As a rule, in the countries, this concealment is justified by state secrets, involving the matters of national security, economic, political interests, and so on. But where the money is actually going, people do not know. Why does this happen? That is because the world political and priestly gangs exist and there is a struggle for power and control of financial streams. Under this guise of secrecy, politicians pass laws that are favorable for their rule and their business and plunder the state budget. And people live in poverty again. The same thing happens also at the world level among states, only this theft takes place already on a larger scale. If the institutions of political and priestly power are abolished in the world, secrets will vanish as well. When the world society becomes united in its creative processes and spiritual aspirations, the concept of secrecy will disappear. Society itself will simply decide what expenditure items are a priority and what their funds should be spent on in the first place in order to improve life in it. And each person of the world community should be able to monitor what exactly the funds have been used for and what needs they have been spent on, to the last penny. Basically, to create such conditions that there is not a single loophole for stealing public funds or self-serving profiteering off them. Resolving the issues of self-government of the world society should be open and transparent at all levels. Now people do not participate in this process not only on a global scale but even in their own country. Let's take a more or less loyal example, the Slavic countries. In the present system, people have delegated their rights to deputies, who, having got into power, sit there for years in the immunity, getting a bunch of benefits and privileges. For the most part, these deputies defend their personal interests or interests of some corporations, which belong to priests and politicians, those in power. Thus they operate with the power from the people, acting on behalf of the people or supposedly in their name, which has nothing to do with addressing these questions. By the way, the word deputy itself is also derived from a dead language, one of the favorites of archons, Latin. Deputatus, deputare, means to point, to intend. Note that it is not a chosen but an appointed, sent, from above by those in power, person. Basically, it was so in the past. In the ancient Greece, for example, the name deputy was given to a servant of a priest, whom the latter sent with holy orders to Delphi or to Olympus. And in ancient Christian church, the name deputy was given to one of the clergymen, who was walking in front of the patriarch cleaning the way for him. In the new global community, oriented towards the spiritual vector of development, there must be no permanent representatives at all, like present-day deputies and such. If it is necessary to delegate one's authorized representatives to public meetings to communicate the opinion of people of this or that area, then certainly. But these people should really be elected from the people according to their personal and moral qualities, the level of responsibility and professionalism, and certain deeds, which they have already undertaken for society. These representatives should be deprived of any benefits and privileges. They must carry out public activities at their own expense, in their spare leisure time, without receiving any material or other compensation, or any advantages over other participants of society. Moreover, only when this person improves the living conditions of all the participants of the society, together with everyone, he improves life for himself as well. As the result of creation of such conditions, the current issues of society life will be dealt with by honest, intelligent people, who are ready to sacrifice their personal time not for themselves but for the sake of service to society, in some sense, to the detriment of their material life, receiving nothing in return. Naturally, society will control the resolution of such issues and formulate the priorities. And the most important, life-supporting issues should be addressed by the entire world community. By the way, modern technology makes it possible to hold such open public meetings in real time, without costly trips and gatherings, and solve everything easily at the local level. This not only saves a lot of time and funds, allowing prompt action on manageable issues, but, what is equally important, the openness of such online meetings to the public also eliminates unnecessary mass gatherings and excludes secret games and lobbying of private interests to the detriment of society. Anastasia, all right, voting, control of vote count and data verification, prompt resolution of issues, and voicing of different views, all this can really be done even online. But what if someone wants to monopolize digital and online technologies into private hands and thus create an instrument of power for themselves? Rigden, if society itself controls and thwarts any attempts to monopolize digital, online, or other technologies as well as means of communication, this will not happen. And on the whole, while building such a society, it should be taken into account that all the strategic and life-sustaining enterprises and their resources should belong to society. This applies to the energy sector, financial institutions, banks and so on, production and sale of medicine and medical equipment, development and mining operations, and also large industrial, agricultural, and scientific enterprises. All these should belong to the entire world community. Ownership of all this by private capital must not be allowed, in other words, for all of it in one way or another to be in private hands or belong to any particular individuals or groups. Only under these conditions, it is possible to avoid corruption, rising prices, and financial crises. Society itself will set prices that are acceptable for living, will define the quality of services, and so on. Otherwise, if nothing changes, it will be as it is now, if not worse. That is, corruption will thrive as well as various scams, purchase and sale of air, unconscionable loans, inflation, and all the other traps of the animal mind in the area of free market relationships. It is enough to look at the modern world. all the collapses and sharp rises of national and international currencies, various world economic, food, political, and other crises, all this is artificial, all this is done by people. It is just that someone creates conditions for this and earns incredible capitals from it, while someone else loses his shirt during these artificially stimulated processes. In a normal human society, this is unacceptable. Anastasia, you have mentioned that financial institutions must belong to the entire world society. So, it implies that people will still deal with money in one form or another. Rigden, money is an equivalent of exchange. An equivalent in the sense of having power, from the Latin aequus meaning equal and valentes as having a meaning, power. This power is a derivative from the material world and there is no escaping it. Man lives in the material world and resides in the physical body. And the latter is subject to the laws of a three-dimensional world, that is, the physical body has to be fed, dressed, kept clean, it is necessary to satisfy the required, life-supporting needs, fight its diseases, and so on. For this purpose, of course, food, medicine, clothes, and other items of the material world are needed. Therefore, a person needs to earn the means for daily living needs, which support his existence in the body. Anastasia, but as long as money is in use in any form, there will be a division into rich and poor, as history shows. Besides, wealth implies the existence of private business and, therefore, property. Rigden, as for the rich and poor, society must create such conditions for its existence so that there is no poverty in it at all. At the present level of technology, all this is quite possible to achieve, to feed all the people, turn the desert into a blooming garden, clean even polluted waters and make them fit for use, and use alternative energy sources instead of fossil fuels. All these technologies already exist, but they are only available to few. Most people in the world do not know about it. This information is concealed on purpose, and the development of such progressive technologies is restrained artificially all over the world by the order of the world's priests. Why is this done? So that those same archons can keep their power and the political levers of influence in the world society, continue to exploit billions of people, increase tension in the world, and keep most people in fear of falling below the poverty line. For when the consciousness of the masses is busy with issues of survival, it is much easier to manipulate and control them and incline the choice of people in favor of implementation of the animal mind's will. So, when building a new society, it is necessary to make it so that poverty as a phenomenon does not exist on the planet at all. It is essential that people are provided with all the necessary things and that there is only medium and high level of prosperity. If a person is a workaholic, he is welcome to earn. Honest private business is quite acceptable, for example, providing some services to the public, but in no way is it acceptable to own factories and steamboats, that is, large enterprises, monopolies, and entire industries that support the life of society. There must be clear restrictions on wealth. The maximum capitalization of one family as a social unit should not exceed $10 million in monetary value, according to today's prices, including all tangible and fixed assets. And even that is a lot. For now, I am naming too high a number only so as not to shock those people who have a much larger capital. These funds are more than enough to support a family. An excess, that is, family income that exceeds this sum must go towards the needs of society. In other words, a person will not get rich from this, and at the same time, he will help other people. After all, since ancient times it has been known that the true riches of a hard-working person are in his spiritual wealth. And in the society where universal human spiritual and moral values will dominate, such actions and examples of man must be made prestigious. After all, what drives rich people in the world today? Is it the thirst for money itself? No. They are driven by the banal desire from the animal nature to show off to others. Like, he has a better car, a better house, and even his socks cost much more than a neighbor earns in a month. All this is ridiculous, it's all nonsense, which has been imposed by the consumer society and the fashion that the clever create to deceive the foolish, so that it would be easier to swindle them out of their money. It is unlimited capital that breeds aggression in society, provokes envy, the desire to manipulate other people, and promotes domination of the animal nature in a person. In a normal, civilized society this must not happen at all. This is not nice and is disreputable. But it should be cool, respectable, and prestigious to help society and people, and not simply to feed someone one time or give toys once only, but to provide real, regular practical help to villages, towns, regions, and so on, that is, do what one can to help society. Anastasia, how can people in responsible positions be protected from the temptation of using their status? Rigdon, elementary. The executive bureaucracy that deals with the current affairs of society should be reduced to the necessary minimum and prevented as best as possible from having any opportunities to use their official position for personal, private interests. In other words, it is necessary to create such conditions for work of people in these positions that would exclude any possibility of being tempted by power, status, or material gain. Moreover, to make it so that people could constantly monitor, including in real-time mode, the activity of functionaries, that is, nomenclature employees of the administrative machinery. And the very process of performance by officials of their duties must be made so open to the public that these people would not be able to exercise the qualities of their animal nature in their positions. Then functionaries will truly become public servants, that is, they will conscientiously serve people and perform their duties honestly. Anastasia, this is certainly good. But personally, I cannot imagine how this will look in real life. Rigdon, do not worry, there are many intelligent, professional people in every area of the life of society, and in this one as well, who, when they embrace the general idea, will be able to, upon joining forces with like-minded people, not only in their own country, think everything through sensibly from the least to the most. If people, each person whom this information has not left indifferent, do not sit back and do nothing but start to put things in order at least in the professional and other areas of life of society that are more familiar to them, then sooner or later they will succeed. People themselves will create a system that will block all the possible loopholes and any possibilities for the manifestation of any corruption in society, especially in public positions. By virtue of having work experience in a particular field, knowing its pitfalls, keeping a close watch and controlling their animal nature, they will think it through how to exclude every possibility, all preconditions for the creation of conditions that tempt a person. Anastasia, all right, and how will the public control and manage, for instance, science? After all, science is diverse, and in such specific matters one should really be an expert, or at least understand what is discussed and choose promising directions of its development. Rigdon, there are specialists, scientists, who pursue one field of science or another and develop it. Society provides funds for that field depending on how important, necessary, and impactful it is for the entire world society today. Society should take care of its savings like a careful owner and spend funds on what is really necessary. In science, for example, it is necessary to exclude instances of allocation of funds to those who crave to have any power over people, who, as people say, are engaged in science eyewash, but at the same time do nothing useful. It is necessary to liberate scientific environment of such people or transfer them to another job and create the conditions there under which society would benefit from them. I have already said that science is the process of knowing the truth. It should not be a means of achieving power. A specialist must do his work conscientiously and have the appropriate conditions for life and proper professional activity. Generally, in any branch and sphere of life, it is necessary to create such conditions that there would not even be possibilities for the manifestation of domination of the animal nature, so that all information would be open to people, and society would make major decisions together. The community must take care of each person, and the person must take care of the community. It is necessary to use this property of the human nature, imitation. Imitation is an instinct of the animal nature in human. But you won't get rid of it because we reside in the material body and live in the material world. They should simply be used correctly. For example, when it becomes fashionable and popular in society to do good, to selflessly help people, gratuitously serve the public good, to possess such qualities as honesty, responsibility, and conscientiousness, in general, to be a real human being, this will be taken up by many, as a result of imitation. But most importantly, these ideas will pervade new generations, for whom such human aspirations, cultural and moral values, and the dominance of the spiritual nature will become quite natural norms of life. This means that for new generations it will be easier to overcome their animal nature, exercise their personal spiritual growth, which naturally will be reflected in the perfection of the world community itself. Anastasia, yes, it really is an absolutely new model of mankind, of which people have dreamt for a long time as an ideal of the civic society. It's just that they imagined all this narrow-mindedly, within the limits of desires from the animal nature. Now I understand why they didn't manage to bring this idea to life. People tried to create such a society not from the perspective of their true, spiritual nature but from the perspective of the material system of power and control which, one way or another, overlaps with the programs of will of the animal mind. In most cases, they documented even the very idea of a new social order with infusion of their animal nature desires. Rigdon, quite right. But here is what I want to say in this regard. In our time, humanity has, for the first time in history during the course of all of its existence, such a unique opportunity, creation of a self-governing united world community with the spiritual vector of development. Previously, some 30 to 50 years ago, the implementation of this idea on a global scale would have been impossible, since there were no technical conditions and no availability to the majority of people of interactive communication via the now familiar to many means of communications, for example, mobile communication, and the Internet. In their historical time, individual groups of those initiated into the primordial knowledge tried to transform society. I mean, for instance, Imhotep and his people or the Knights Templar. And for some time they managed to improve the life of people of their country and even several states at least a little bit and to give many personalities an opportunity to develop spiritually during their short human lives. But all these are individual cases, practice of which later did not develop properly because all this was done under the conditions of existence of the rule of politicians and priests over society, and more precisely in the conditions of existence of an artificially created priestly system of control of mankind, according to programs of will of the animal mind. And now humanity has the only realistic chance of saving themselves and their future. Today in the human society, the animal mind is reaching its apogee, a triumph over human thinking. Just look at the speed with which the consumer format of thinking is being imposed upon the world. A little more, and all the spiritual stimuli will be destroyed or substituted both in society and in the consciousness of an individual. And basically, the fast pace of overall introduction of accessible technical means of communication among the peoples around the world and popularization of minimum acceptable literacy in these matters for the public exactly the work of global conductors of the animal mind for the purpose of organizing subsequent total control over mankind and submission of the latter to its will. But this is also a weakness of the animal mind. Mankind has a unique opportunity to use the same tools and the technical base prepared by it in order to self-organize and unite, directly oppose the animal mind, and create a free society on the planet. Now there is a unique opportunity to turn over the monad, otherwise, a little longer and it will be too late. For everything depends on the human choice. Anastasia, yes, this is indeed a real opportunity to turn over the monad. Curiously, the principle of rule and control in society today is presented to people in the form of a pyramid with its top pointing up. At its bottom is the majority of the population, in fact, those surviving in the beggarly conditions that were artificially created by politicians and priests. And at the top, there are only a few endowed with power by this society, who live by using public wealth and have most of benefits and privileges. But if the sign is turned over, we get a triangle with the top pointing down, according to the principle of creative AllatRA as the symbol of society, in which there is no rule as such, where each person, while perfecting spiritually, improves their life on account of benefiting the entire mankind, where the world society controls the processes of its life, moves in the spiritual direction, and uses all the amenities and resources. This is exactly the movement from lower to higher. This is the real progress, a qualitative evolutionary leap of the human civilization. Rigden, quite true, so actually there is nothing difficult here. Simply people themselves should actively engage in the process of transformation of society and create to the best of their ability the necessary conditions for. Figure 109. The pyramid of the human society. A triangle with the top pointing up is a symbol of the power of priests and politicians over nations. A triangle with the top pointing down is a symbol of a free and equal society, the AllatRA of peoples. Education of nations, unification of the world community, and for human civilization to follow the spiritual vector of development. The main conditions for creating such a society. Improving people's spiritual and intellectual literacy. Human spiritual self-perfection and his active participation in the life of society. Autonomous unification of nations into one world. Society. Abolition of the global system of rule of priests and politicians. Stringent restrictions on individual capitalization. The governance of society must belong only to society itself as a whole. Most important of all, ideological transformation of the society, which is inseparably connected to the domination of spiritual nature and moral values both in the person and in society. As every person should keep track in himself of manifestations of negative thoughts coming from the animal nature, so society as a whole must control its collective, public thoughts. And because the main source of the latter is mass media in all its forms, society itself must keep an eye on its cleanliness. That is, what should be developed is the culture of popularization of spiritual and moral values, knowledge, good, conscience, honor, dignity, and friendship among people, of positive, creative models and examples of thinking, the best human actions both of the personality and groups of people. There should be no propaganda of negativity imposed by the animal mind, of wars, violence, murder, strife, hatred, selfishness, and so on. Moreover, the initiative and the matter of popularization of the constructive ideology must come from society itself as well as prevention of any attempts of imposing the destructive ideology upon people. These conditions are the basis for the formation of a united world community with a spiritual vector of development. Here, it is important to understand how significant is the role played in the life of humanity by an artificial information field, which is created by people themselves, while conductors of either the will of the animal mind or conductors of the will of the spiritual world. Today it is no secret that thanks to mass media, a certain human communication mass is being formed in the world, which outnumbers any largest physical gathering of people many times over. But also in this artificial information field, various patterns of uniform perception, thinking, behavior, and actions of people are also created, spread, by means of infection and imitation, and function. And they form this invisible unified mass. That is, there is massification of consciousness and behavior of many individuals, who belong to objectively unrelated social groups and cultures. Transpersonal communication connects and unites different people. But what is remarkable is that, in contrast to the physical crowd, in this large mass each person individually, by one's own choice, connects to a flow of one or another information, which eventually makes up a general diverse information field. These flows, like thousands of streams, have their direction, expansion, strengthening, and deepening into programs of one or another information channel that unites them. Within limits of the material world, There are only two diametrically opposed vectors of information, from the will of the animal mind and from the will of the spiritual world, each of which forms its own information field and, accordingly, its critical mass. The latter, as a phenomenon, is subject to the laws of the physics of the material world, only on a global scale, and implies this mass, which is necessary to start a self-sustaining chain reaction in the human society with employment of an enormous amount of energy. Thus, when there is an obvious preponderance in the global domination of programs of one of the two information fields, from the will of the animal mind or from the will of the spiritual world, thanks to the human communication mass, the monad will turn over. Anastasia, that is, outwardly, illusory, the highest possible degree of individualization of people kind of remains. And a person seems to be free to choose how to get information, for example, whether to listen to the radio, read newspapers, magazines, watch different TV channels, and then discuss it with other people, or pay attention to different messages and entertainment on the internet. But it turns out that there is no freedom as such, and all this is just an illusion of individualization. In fact, by choosing something out of civilization's offerings, a person connects to an artificially created information field which, one can say, forms a mass out of thin air. After all, most people, just like him, watch one and the same channels on television, read the same newspapers, listen to the same radio, visit the same websites, and communicate online via social networks. And the degree of orientation of the activity of such a mass is constantly monitored and controlled with, for example, TV ratings, the highest website traffic, popularity of certain articles in the press, and so on. But this is a veritable massification of psyche, which has previously been practiced by shamans with a tambourine, magicians by means of rituals, and the like enchanters in front of the public. Only now the same ancient mechanism of influencing the human consciousness is carried out with new tools and on a more global scale. But principles are the same. I mean, at first the audience is provided with a certain set of information, a single system of its perception by the masses, common goals and value orientations are created. The modern communicator broadcasts messages, which cause, for example, the suggestion of stupor, non-critical imitation, and blind submission, that is, an emotional and psychological condition that is common for the audience. This eventually leads to a build-up of a certain pattern of thinking and behavior formed by this information of the human communication mass and the direction of its attention, and therefore also actions in the program direction. Moreover, it goes unnoticed for the individual who makes up this mass. Rigdon, quite true. This is an influence on the human consciousness that has been known since ancient times. But today it is used in fundamentally new quality. And its global differential is that in the artificial information field, which broadcasts the will of the animal mind through people conductors, with all the variety of information which stimulates the animal nature in a person, an individual, in fact, has no choice. For the personality, this is a dead end in spiritual development, no matter how much information a person gets from this source. For all this information will focus the person's attention on prolongation of the animal mind's life. However, in the information field which has been artificially created in humanity and which broadcasts the will of the spiritual world through people conductors, the choice remains for an individual. Since by receiving the truth, due to its reproduction in pure form by such people through the same artificial information field, every person gets an opportunity to know himself, to become an observer from the spiritual nature. That is, to connect to the global information field, which in its essence can in no way be compared to the limited, artificially created information field of mankind created in the material world. And so, a person will help his personality grow and qualitatively transform spiritually into a new being. And that is the key difference. Anastasia, you said it exactly right, a limited, artificially created information field. For the mass consciousness, a myth is created through mass media, first of all, television and internet, and actively supported and cultivated, which forms a certain perception of the world, creates installations, and in its diversity, contributes to the mutual strengthening of information. This myth reinforces in consciousness of an individual, in essence, made-up causal relationships between real objects, generates legends about events and public persons of the past and present, forms or presents a ready-made invented model of attitude towards reality. This fragmented knowledge about the world, but served in a such beautiful wrapper myth, creates among the masses an illusion of comprehensive knowledge about the world and those events that take place. The same principle of false perception triggers in them as in the audience at a magician's show: I saw it, so it must be true. Although in fact, people do not even analyze the received information on their own and do not bother to understand the reasons who and why needs the masses to pay attention to this information, while looping it on such a narrow range of matter of the three-dimensional world. Despite all the external variety of information, people are actually dishabituated from thinking independently, by rebuilding the perception and thinking of the audience after their own fashion. The clip character of the flow of different messages alone deserves special notice, where the main aim is to excite emotionally and attract attention to this or that message. Rigdon, I would say more precisely that the main goal here is not to attract but to distract the attention of a person from his inner spiritual development. Besides, if you look at all the diversity of today's information, at its basis you can see the single material root and activation in a person of desires of the animal nature, where everything is built on provoking specific emotions and forming a certain mindset in the crowd under the cross-influence of various sources of information. Anastasia, indeed, if a person is on the animal nature's wavelength, then, in fact, he has no choice, as he does not even realize that he is an object of external manipulations and he perceives the images and thoughts imposed upon him as his own ideas, without thinking about the true source of their origin. But when a person is an observer from the spiritual nature, he has something to compare to, he really has a choice, he understands how the animal mind influences him, what the spiritual world is, how fleeting life is, and how important personal spiritual self-perfection in it is. Rigdon, yes, that is all true. Many people, unfortunately, do not even give a thought to whence various thoughts appear in them, why they give attention to them, and keep up the life of one or another program in themselves. Who and why needs to make it so that a large mass of people, among whom, like a speck of dust, you are also, saw this or that impressive story, film, a shocking message, or read an emotionally charged article. People do not think about the original source, what this information carries in itself, whom it really serves, what is, in general, behind one or another artificially created information field worldwide, to which a person gives his attention, wasting valuable lifetime on it. Here is a simple example from the life of a modern average family resting at home in the evening after working day. As a rule, everyone is busy with their own informational entertainment. Some spend time online, focusing their attention on messages, games, and entertainment that excite them the most and captures their attention. It is enough to look at the official statistics and the names of the most visited websites to understand what hooks of the animal nature still hold people's attention, forming a mass of a certain type with its own characteristics. Other members of the family listen, for example, to music, experiencing emotions that correspond to this melody. Still others watch TV, empathizing with the characters of films and programs and mentally taking part in a virtual action. And some people are busy with domestic chores, but they also scroll in their thoughts information, for example, about the moments that affected them psychologically, events of the day, news obtained from mass media, or about their current personal problems. But in absolutely all of mentioned above, attention is captured equally to the maximum by their avocation, which, in fact, has a material vector and is connected to the forces of the animal mind. In fact, all these occupations are empty, this is informational distraction that destroys lifetime. And life, like water in hands, runs out quickly. It seems that a person has not done anything bad, but nothing good has come from his existence either. By its content, life ends up being empty, like an ear of grain in the wind, which was blown about here and there, and then rotted on the vine without giving spiritual fruit. Same here, everyone, like ears of grain, is distracted from their spiritual development by external information. People's consciousness becomes so narrowed, fixated on this or that emotion and thoughts from the animal nature that, in these moments, nobody even thinks about the spiritual, not to mention about doing serious work on themselves. Though in fact, spiritual development is the most important thing in the life of any person, it is the meaning of his existence. The person empathizes emotionally, gives much attention to an empty illusion, which does not give him anything, as it does not enrich him spiritually. But this illusion pumps out emotions, power, from the mass of people formed by it. Everything that an individual gets after participating expansively, intrusively, impulsively, emotionally unrestrained, in this illusory for the psyche of the masses show is devastation, strengthening of thoughts, emotions, and desires from the animal nature, in fact, poison for the soul. Thus, the formed mass of people that have been engrossed by this or that informational illusion, which casts each individual into a kind of illusory reverie and ignores any hint at his spiritual development, is invisibly controlled by the animal mind. Each day, people unconsciously give their life force to it, paying their attention to information of the animal nature and thus, like donors, constantly feeding and increasing the power of the animal mind. But awakening spiritually, the person begins to think about these vital for him questions. He begins to realize that until then he was just an unconsenting element of reproduction and of distribution of information from the animal nature for this mass. By awakening spiritually and working on himself, a person, in fact, makes his true choice. He becomes an active conductor of the will of the spiritual world, contributing to the dissemination of the truth in the existing artificially created by people information field. The truth becomes a power, which multiplies his capabilities many times over. Anastasia, yes, the truth, as it turns out, is very simple. So it appears that, at this stage, the animal mind is actively creating a system that in theory should globally cover the consciousness of the majority of people on the planet. Rigdon, unfortunately, that is so. A tool is actively being perfected right now which includes all the super effects of new mass communications. This tool is already well known to most people on this planet, I mean the internet, as one of the most effective means of massification of the human psyche today. Nowadays the internet, which is rapidly taking place of television, is being actively implemented around the world. Every effort is being made to provide mass access to it for different nations, that is, to attract the maximum number of people to the World Wide Web. Its advantage over television, print media, and radio is that the internet combines all these means of mass communication but is less costly and, therefore, more accessible to the masses. It retains a degree of human individualization. But most importantly, embedded in it is the disposition to reproduce and duplicate information across the world at the expense of the formed mass itself as well as of opinion leaders and active people. But this global technology also hides the animal mind's weak spot. And smart people should take it into account. If previously a person, while in a physical crowd and understanding all the absurdity of actions committed by it, could in actual fact do little to change the situation, now every active person is given such an opportunity. In other words, thanks to internet technologies, even one man in the field is already a warrior, for he alone brings spiritual truth to many people. Each person gets an opportunity to reproduce information, quickly transmit, and replicate it. Everyone who has received this information is given the right to make his own conscious choice, to continue to serve the destructive will of the animal mind or to implement the creative will of the spiritual world. Now such unique conditions have formed, under which mankind can use its chance and turn over the monad towards spiritual development of the civilization. It can create an entirely new social world order, using the tools of informational influence of the animal mind upon people for the purpose and in a direction that is completely opposite to it, development of humanity in the spiritual and creative way. The personal contribution of each person to the common cause of spiritual and moral transformation of society is very important. One can say that every, even the most seemingly simple and insignificant thing done for the purpose of disseminating the truth, in the end, one way or another, affects the global situation in society and forms its future. Like the sea is formed from many streams and rivers, so the global creative information field is formed out of thoughts and actions of the many people, who accepted the truth and became its active conductors. If a person, who has all this information, wishes to disseminate it, then it is necessary for him or her, 1. To provide people with the entire extent of knowledge outlined in these books while trying to disseminate it to a maximum number of people across the planet. 2. To contribute to the processes of unification of people on the basis of this information, which will invariably entail a change in behavior and attitudes as well as formation of new values and spiritual self-education of the community. Provided that these objectives are implemented, it is inevitable that a self-sufficient world society will form which will be capable of organizing itself, solving important issues, and implementing the decisions taken. Active communication of its every participant will only serve to strengthen, support, and expand the impact of this information, convey a certain emotional and psychological tone to other people, inspire them by an example of behavior, the general idea, and actions. In general, there is nothing difficult here. The main thing is to convey information to people in pure form, be an active participant of the process of formation of the new society, and to constantly work on yourself. People have dreamt of such a society since the dawn of times, calling it in their legends the land of good, the state of bliss, the golden millennium, the world of justice, millennium, that is, the future that can get closer by divine intervention but will be reached through human actions. For example, in Christianity the concept of millennium belongs to eschatology, the Greek word eschatos meaning the last one, finite and logos, a word, a teaching, that is, to the religious teaching about the final destinies of the world and man, about the last stages of the domination of the animal mind in humanity. Eschatology looks at the topics of the future millennial reign of Christ after the second coming, the return to earth and his victory over Satan, of the Armageddon, the final battle between good and evil at the end of times, in which kings of the entire inhabited earth will take part. But who is it, who in the context of this Christian teaching is called Satan? The animal mind of the material world. Suffice it to look around to see what's going on, struggle for power, the priestly, political, and economic violence of gangs from the archons over nations, dominance of market and consumer attitudes which form purely materialistic thinking in people, relationships based on the animal instincts. There is a veritable aggressive informational attack on the human society by the animal mind, in fact, an information war. The modern man more often chooses matter and hardly comes out of the sphere of influence of his animal nature, his earthly selfhood, selfishness. As a conductor, he imposes this model of behavior onto others, without even noticing that he is in the grip of the will that is alien to his spiritual nature. This is precisely the power, the guise of Satan, of the animal mind who has enslaved mankind and is now walking around in it without a mask. But the opportunity to change everything is in people's hands. People are waiting for divine intervention. But it is the same as with human dialogue with God. It can be achieved only by choice, actions, and real spiritual transformation of man himself. The Bible has the following words of Jesus to his disciples: I will ask the Father, and he will give you another comforter, that he may be with you forever, that is, the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it does not see him or know him. The knowledge has been given to man, and his choice and action depend only on him. And changes in the whole global society depend on actions of every person. For all the living people, this is really the last remaining chance to spiritually save themselves and the civilization. Building such a society is a necessity since this is the only model that will allow humanity to survive in the future. It is actually easy to build it. The foundations have been given, while the details of this new model will not be hard for people to work out together. Already now, there are many competent and clever people who really can and want to change the modern society, make it free and equal not on paper under slogans of the archons but in life, from the perspective of domination of the spiritual nature in man. Building such a society depends on the actions and the personal choice of each individual. The archons have accustomed people to doing nothing and to waiting passively for someone to come, decide, and do everything for them. They have limited the prison freedom in their system for a person to a place on the couch, where he can spit at the TV set as much as he wants and abuse politicians and priests because nobody will hear him anyway. But it is easy for one to destroy this imposed illusion in oneself. One simply must not sit back and do nothing. It is necessary to transform yourself and society and be a messenger of peace in the full sense of this word. Anastasia, a messenger? Well said indeed. Because a messenger is inherently the one who brings knowledge. And in the modern world, this name is also given to a character in a classic tragedy who narrates outside the scene about what is happening. Given all the above mentioned, a messenger of peace is one who knows and explains the hidden meaning of what is happening to all people who are watching the performance on the world stage. Rigden, all of us, while in bodies, take part in the theater of matter. The spectacle is shocking, but it is edifying. The truth reveals itself to the eyes of some, while others are absorbed by the performance acting. The only difference is whose side your consciousness is on in this place of illusory shows. A messenger is capable of communicating the truth to many people, friends, relatives, acquaintances, and strangers. He is able to induce the desire in them to tell the truth to their circles, and they can tell others. And so the message will fly around the world like a falcon in its swift flight. How fast this information will disseminate in society depends on people themselves, on the efforts of each messenger. The more there are of those who get inspired by the truth, the more there will be of those who will begin to change the situation in the global society, according to their opportunities at the local level. All conceivable available means can be used for dissemination of information, verbal transmission, mass media, including radio, press, television, and the main lever of mass communication today, the Internet. If every person applies his hand, his mind, and the purity of his intentions to it, then this original information will spread very quickly around the world, and within a short period of time, this idea will permeate the majority. And in the majority lies the real power. Once people receive and get inspired by this information, they themselves will understand everything how to improve the life of society according to their real abilities, and a tide of universal unification will start. So, a lot depends on one person. The main thing is not to sit back and wait for mercy from the archons. The genuine spiritual side of a human being in relation to society is manifested in his sincere intention and selfless action for the good of society. Once united in such an intention, people will be able to achieve more and create conditions to form an entirely new civilization, humanity that will be guided by the essence of the word AllatRA. The secret of this word was once kept in their circles by the spiritually initiated people who were resisting the power of the animal mind in any of its manifestations. These were the true warriors of light, the keepers of the primordial knowledge. For their feat of arms, the truth was revealed to them, there is no power greater than the spiritual power. By possessing the primordial knowledge, you also possess the power. By possessing the power, you influence with the word that is the glory, the name, and the call. The glory heralds the truth in the radiance of immortality for those who have been crowned in honor in approaching the One. The name manifests the sign of the primordial One, which is the basis and the key to understanding events. The eternal call is the primordial sound, the sound of creation. It fills the sign with the power of Allat and makes it mighty in creation. For Allat is the manifestation of God's will. It is the all-inherent force, the foremother of everything created according to his will. The worthy one follows the eternal call of the soul, resounding the cry of the soul's victory, AllatRA. Everyone who hears it is a summoned one, and together are the power capable of changing the entire world. The creating power coming from God is AllatRA. No period has been put in this book because the final word rests with people. The official website of Anastasia Novik. schambala.com.ua. Email of Anastasia Novik, Anastasija_Novix@mail.ru. The books by Anastasia Novik are well known all over the world as spiritual, intellectual bestsellers that give answers to exclusively personal questions of every person, that give a deep understanding of the world and oneself, strengthen the best human qualities, inspire to inner self-knowledge, inspire to broaden one's outlook, gain victory over oneself and do real good deeds. The books of the writer, Sensei. The Primordial of Shambhala, 4 volumes, Izoismus, Birds, and a Stone, Crossroads and AllatRA are translated into many languages. They have become a handbook for people of different ages, nationalities, religions, living on different continents, in various countries. The phenomenon of the works of Anastasia Novik is that everyone sees in them something innermost. It is a mine of knowledge about the world and human being, about his meaning of life and practical ways of self-knowledge and self-improvement. These books have united many people on the planet by their universal knowledge and by novelty of perception of the world and oneself. All books are freely available to everyone on the internet on the official website of the author. schambala.com.ua books.allatra.org/n-allatra-book.org. The unique books by Anastasia Novik have become the basis for a large-scale association of like-minded and kind people all over the world. Thanks to these books, good people from all over the world who want to apply their skills and abilities towards creative actively unite. These people implement large-scale projects that develop and strengthen morality, spirituality, and culture in the world community. The example of such an association of kind, unselfish people is AllatRA International Public Movement, which global international activity plays today an invaluable role in the formation of spirituality, morality, and humanity all over the world. AllatRA IPM is a global association of those who actually do good and maintain peace for all people. AllatRA movement unites people all over the world regardless of status, social categories, political and religious views. In a short period of time, hundreds of thousands of like-minded people in more than 180 countries around the world have become active participants of the movement. Our strategic goal is to induce people to actively participate in life of the society and together with people of goodwill from various countries be involved in useful activity for the world community. We are outside of politics and outside of religion. Thanks to the initiative and unselfish actions of active participants of the AllatRA International Public Movement, various creative projects and good deeds aimed at creating conditions to unlock the creative potential of people and at revival of universal human spiritual and moral values in the whole global community are implemented around the world. Among the projects are International Internet TV, AllatRA TV, the Nationwide Initiative, AllatRA Global Partnership Agreement, Creative Media Space, AllatRA Radio, AllatRA Science, Modern Innovative Research in the Spheres of Climatology and Physics, International Portal of Global Positive Information Space, AllatRA News and many others. We do not divide people into leaders and executors, every one of us is a leader and an executor, and together we are force. Our general manager is conscience. We invite everyone who would like to show kindness and to help the international community to take the path of spiritual and cultural development through socially important joint projects. Everyone who wants, who is able and who acts is with us. It is timely and fashionable to be a good person. Coordination Center of AllatRA IPM.